Welcome to episode 3 of Kitchen Table Politics. I'm your host, Jeremy Massengale, and we have a big show for you today. I'm very excited to talk to a good friend of mine on the topic of racism. This show actually went a little longer than I expected, so we're going to get right to the conversation. Thank you so much for listening. With us today is Christian King. He is a clinical therapist here in the East Tennessee region. We have a very special topic we want to discuss today. We're actually going to tackle, or attempt to tackle at least, the subject of racism. I know that is on, well, it seems to be on everybody's mind when politicians and reporters talk about it. We'll see how that affects you all at home and Christian in his everyday life. Christian, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Let me talk just a little bit about my experiences with racism, and then I think you'll probably have a little more depth on the subject than I do.
Okay.
I grew up for probably the first 10 years of my life in a small county here in eastern Tennessee, all white county. I had no minorities at all. The N-word was used quite a bit when referring to African American or black people. Which do you prefer, Christian? Does it matter to you which people use, black or African American?
For me personally, I really don't care. Sometimes it depends on where I'm at. I may use I may say black in some areas. I may say African American, and particularly, of course, sometimes I have to specify if they're of Negroid descent, but yet they're not American. Obviously, if they're from the islands, whatever, obviously they're not American. So
right.
I just refer to them as a black person, but I know it can be offensive. And Jeremy, if you don't mind, let me say that. Let me back up and say that I don't want to speak for all black people.
Absolutely.
In the same in the same manner that I don't like Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton speaking for me on certain topics, I definitely want to speak for every black person in America or African American. But I know that some of them may hear this podcast and agree with me, and many of them may not. For me personally, either is fine with me.
Okay, I understand that, how some people feel one way or another about it, and I just wanted to make sure that I understood how you felt at it. I didn't want to be offensive at all.
Right.
So the N-word was used in my county referring to black people. Now it's much different. That county does have minorities living in it, and there's never been an issue there that I know of. Mm-hmm. So, take that how you will. That was my first 10 years. I was not around any black people or African Americans at all, or any other minorities. And then I moved to a suburb outside of Atlanta. And that changed drastically.
Right.
There was every race is represented in Atlanta. So I came into contact with African Americans, Asians, with Mexicans or Latino heritage. And to me, it wasn't a culture shock. Even coming from an all-white county or being around only white people during that time, it didn't bother me personally. I didn't have those same reactions to African Americans that maybe somebody else in my county had. Mm-hmm. And maybe it was because my family didn't use that language. Even when we lived there, that wasn't something that anyone in my family personally would have used.
Right.
Maybe it was watching Good Times and the Jeffersons and just realizing that people are people.
Right.
And, it doesn't matter what color of skin that they have. To be honest, I'll speak for me and not the whole white race at this point.
Right.
We don't think about racism. It's not something that occurs to me on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
I don't live with it or think about it, to be honest with you. Maybe that's just me, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say probably 90% of us don't. We just don't think about it.
No. Well, I think if you and your family were the minority in a certain region, certain area, mm-hmm. in a city where it was 90% black, then the whole idea of racism would become apparent to you.
I'm sure it would.
How your family interacts with those people, the majority, it would totally change your outlook. And I think that's kind of where we are, still.
When I was in high school, mid-90s, there was a little bit of an uptick, tensions between African Americans and whites in our school. I think some of that had to do with a rise in the use of Confederate flags mm-hmm. in our area. Mm-hmm. I don't think most of the people that flew the Confederate flag at that time used it as a racist thing. There was this idea that a love for the South that a lot of people have, and that was their way of expressing it. There's this idea of hospitality and self-reliance in the South. I think that was their meaning, and I had one in my car too. I'll be honest. I didn't put it there. My dad did, but I had it. All right.
Right.
And I did particularly like that flag. Not because I was racist, because again, I didn't think about race. It wasn't something that was on my mind.
Right.
It was, I like being a Southerner. I like living in the South because I've been to other regions of the country. No offense to you other regions of the country. But life is different here than it is in those other regions. And to me, that's what I was representing. I understand now that I'm an older guy and not in high school anymore and see how things really are. I can understand how that makes some people feel. Actually, something you said to me probably a year or so ago about how it made your mother feel.
Right.
Being in the marches and things in the 60s and being assaulted.
Right.
That was the thing those people that were assaulting them were carrying was that flag. And to her, it means something very different than what it means to me.
I remember, I grew up in the state of Georgia and now I live in Tennessee. And I remember the state of Georgia had a long debate about the Confederate flag being used in the state flag. You may remember the old Georgia flag had part of it. I think half of the state flag was Confederate flag. The other part was a state seal. And now it's been changed. But so there was a big debate about the state flag being what it was at that time. And my mother, I didn't care. As a teenager, I didn't care one way or another. But my mom told me about being in the 60s and marching with the civil rights movement and how she talked about, I think specifically, she said 2 white men were waving the Confederate flag in her face as they spit on her and called her various vulgar names. And so being at the time, I maybe 16 and 17 years old and hearing that for the first time, it totally changed my perspective about the Confederate flag. Now, I don't believe every white person I know that flies the flag necessarily hates black people. I don't believe that. At the same time, as a black man who knows that history from my mother's experience, I can't look at that flag and not remember what she said and it not affect me in some way. So if I have a conversation such as this about the flag, I typically tell that story and just say a symbol to you may mean one thing and a symbol to me, that same symbol to me when I see it or another black person sees it may have a completely different effect. And so I just want not just about the Confederate flag, but just about the issue of race in general. The fact that we need to listen to each other about how when certain things happen, when certain things occur, when we hear about certain situations in the news, whatever, how it affects you may be different how it affects me. And unless I listen to what you feel when it happens, or if you listen to me when I say how it makes me feel, I don't see how we can ever really get past some of these issues of race. I think we really have to start listening to each other and say, look, you don't have to change your perspective, but I would appreciate you trying to understand my point of view from it. And I think that's the first step in really trying to get past some racial issues.
I can definitely understand that. That's one of the reasons why I even wanted to start this podcast in the first place. Right. It's a place where we can just exchange ideas. Either, there's a lot of people that I've sat across the table with that I'm not going to agree with what they have to say, but I at least respect them enough to listen, to hear them say it. And we're not always talking about the same thing.
Right.
And it's important to listen so we can get that message out. Okay, the Confederate flag, to me as a teenager, meant one thing. To a young black man or an older black lady who went through the civil rights era, it means a totally different thing. And we can at least talk about it and work that out.
Right.
The reason I brought that story up is just what you said. That matters to all things, especially racism. It's not just the Confederate flag. It's just one small issue of a huge problem that we need to discuss like adults, politely and civilly and work it out.
Absolutely.
As I said, I don't think about racism until a politician or a newspaper or a news reporter talks about it. It's just not something that I deal with. But to you, maybe that's not the case. Does it affect you on a day-to-day basis?
As a black man who grew up in Georgia and lives in Tennessee, I think about racism every day to some degree. I walk into a store. For instance, how I dress. I may wear a suit one day, or I may wear, on days that I testify in court, I'll always wear a tie. And as a black man, when I look professional, wearing slacks and a dress shirt and a tie, I can be respected. I get treated respect. If on a Saturday or even an afternoon and I'm wearing sweatpants or tennis shoes or a hat or whatever, and I'm looking very relaxed, maybe it's just my personal mentality. I don't know what other people are thinking, but I know I walk into a store or walk into the mall and I feel like the perception is that that man could possibly be a criminal. That man could possibly be a drug dealer or something or whatever. I mean, I see the looks that I see that people give me on days that I dress differently. Suggest to me that, oh, he's dressed a certain way, he's dressed professionally, he can be respected. Or days that I'm not, that guy, watch him, he could be trouble. So there's not a day goes by it doesn't cross my mind at least once in some capacity.
This is it's a terrible point in human history when anybody is treated as African Americans have been treated in this country, or Native Americans have been treated in this country. So just start the conversation. Slavery and anything to do with treating another human being like that is terrible thing. And personally, I don't understand how that ever happened. I could never treat another human being like that. I don't understand it. I don't understand someone hating another person because of the color of their skin. I don't get it. I really don't.
Right.
But one thing I do understand a little more is, let's say, the civil rights era, and before that, there was definitely racism had to do with hate. I hate you because you're black. Now maybe it looks more like fear to me. I fear you because you're black. Do you think there's any truth to that?
I think I use social media a lot. I see not just my friends on social media, but I go to certain websites on social media and just read what strangers post from all over the country. And it definitely seems like a lot of people are afraid, and people fear what they can't understand. I'm trying to say a lot in a short amount of time, but I feel like the aspect of racism right now, first of all, it's always two-sided. You got the white perspective about how they look at blacks, obviously, and I'm speaking strictly not about Hispanic or any other nationality, but strictly black and white. Whites look at blacks a certain way, blacks look at whites a certain way, and I understand having I think a lot of white friends here in this area, as well as having a black background and many black friends. Blacks have a mentality today that says, some of them say, I'm going to assume that you're racist towards me until you prove otherwise. All right. My mother kind of had that mentality. My mom used to say, you got to be careful who you're friends with. You got to be careful, until you really get to know somebody. And so they say, I'm going to assume you're racist until you prove that you're not. And so if I don't know you as a white person, I'm just going to assume you don't like me because I'm black. My dad had a different mentality. My dad never talked about racism, ever. As I got older and literally became an adult, and he and I had some conversations, he told me about some situations he went through. But as a kid, when I was a kid, he never talked about racism. Any experiences he had, never talked about it. And which parent was right? I don't know. I just know that my mom talked about it all the time and talked about her experiences, talked about my mom. She had some issues of racism because of what she experienced, and she didn't trust white people a lot. My dad didn't talk about it ever. But I feel like I say all the time, blacks today, many black people today, many have the mentality, I'm going to assume that you're racist until you prove that you're not. I'm going to assume that you're doing something behind the scenes. You may smile at my face. You may tell me that I'm a good person in spite of my color or whatever. But I'm going to assume that behind the scenes, you're doing something to keep me from progressing, to keep me from being successful. Because that's what's happened to my parents, what's happened to my grandparents, and so forth. So until you prove to me that you see me as an equal, I'm going to assume that you do not view me that way. And so I have to speak to, when I talk about racism, I speak to the black side and the white side and say blacks have to, first and foremost, forgive. We have to forgive the past while still being vigilant in the present. And, we still have to say, we know not everybody's going to agree. We know that not everybody's going to treat us the same way in all aspects, but we can't assume somebody's thinking this. We can't assume somebody's prejudiced, but I'm going to forgive the past and not let it cloud my judgment about how I treat somebody in the present. And the white side of it, I speak to whites and say, just because somebody's dressed a certain way, just because I may look a certain way, you cannot view me as being a certain way. But at the same time, I would ask that you give me the opportunity to get to know me, just to get to know me, and not because you're afraid want to stay away. Keep your child away from me because you look this way, so therefore I'm going to assume. And that's kind of where we are in this divide. It's like we got to speak to both sides to really get to a middle ground.
Talking about fear and how people feel, there's this constant talk of how there's a disproportionate amount of violent crimes among the black community, which leads to white people thinking, well, half of all black people are violent people, which is not true, but that's the message that's out there. Now, there is a lot of violent crime. And to look at the numbers, there's a lot more violent crime where African Americans are killing African Americans than white people are killing African Americans. It's statistically, it's not even close, right? So there are these polls, this data, this violent crime. I don't necessarily believe this myself, but I do have a lot of libertarian friends, and they talk a lot about the war on drugs. Okay, so the war on drugs has caused a lot of African American men to end up in prison. They also have created a black market for drugs, which is a way to gain a lot of money really quick in the African American communities. So there's this mindset that this is the only way I'm going to be able to make money. It's in a black market, so it's violent, and a lot of families are broken up if they do get caught and sent to prison.
Right.
If there's not a war on drugs, is there a black market or prisons full of African American men that break up these families, and you have your fathers at home to look after your young ones?
Okay,
It's a tough question, and again, it's not something I necessarily believe.
No, I understand.
But it's a different way of looking at things, and,
Right.
and interesting anyway.
There's several things I want to say to that, and where do I start? Okay, first and foremost, there is no crime that happens in the black community that isn't happening in the white community. There's murders in the black community. There's murders in the white community. Statistically, because we're a minority and many minorities live in certain, centralized areas, it looks so bad to say, okay, these black people are doing all this, but there's white people killing white people too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So 83%, if I remember the statistic correctly, I think 83% of white Americans are killed by other white Americans. So people are killing, and they're killing people they're around. That's the bottom line.
Right.
Whoever you're near, we live in a very angry society, it seems like, and people are killing whoever they're around. People look at gangbangers, they look at drug dealers and say, well, they're all killing each other. Well, that's society. That's where that's happening in certain areas of certain cities. But right here in East Tennessee, there's murders happening here, and around a lot of white men killing other white men, or even white women killing white women, or whatever. So murders are happening in every race, and I'm not trying to justify anything. I'm just saying that the bottom line is crimes are happening in every society. Crimes are happening in every race, and it's easy to look to, if you put the spotlight on something in a certain place and say, "Oh, look at the problem right here." I'm like, well, the problem is everywhere. When you're talking about the war on drugs, there is an organization that slips my mind at the moment, but they had something that they came up with called the Cradle to Pipeline. I'm still not calling it right. The pipeline of cradle to prison, something like that. And I know I'm butchering the name of that, but it's the whole article is written based on the fact that is the government making a pipeline for black Americans when they come from childbirth to go directly into the prison system. That's basically the gist of it. And the simple question is, are white men getting lesser sentences for the same crimes that black men are getting charged with? Statistically, that is the case. I worked with one of the ladies. She was a therapist here in East Tennessee for many years, and she trained me as I got my master's degree. She worked in the prison system. She was a therapist that worked in the court system here in Knoxville for many years. She told me, a white woman, she told me that she saw numerous cases where white men were getting charged lighter sentences for the same crimes that black men were charged with, clients that she had. And she said she knew it was wrong. And why is that the case? The fact of the matter is, the prison system, this is my belief, the prison system in America was never considered for wealthy white Americans. Never. Do poor white Americans get the prison system? Sure. And you can look by case about a white man who kills a certain man, another man, and a black man who kills a certain man, or are they getting the same length of time? Are they getting paroled, or how soon after they get in prison? The statistics of that is overwhelming. So you would say I would say, based on the information that I've read, on the people I've talked to, it seems that the American justice system is not equal. They want to put away some undesirables, I would say, for a longer period of time. Now, what does that mean for me? That means that when I'm working with young African American males, I have to tell them more so, you have to watch what you do twice as much as your white counterpart. He may get in trouble, but chances are he's gonna get a smack on the wrist, particularly if his dad's a successful businessman here in this town, or his dad does this or that and the other. He may not get in trouble at all. It may never show up on his record. But it's, what I know about here in Knoxville, it's quite possible that you're going to go to jail, or you're going to go to juvenile detention or whatever. So I have to tell Black Americans that I work with, you got to be smart, because it seems that the system is not in your favor. And some people may say, well, that's racist to even suggest that. But the facts are the facts. And I can't deny what I've read. I can't deny the statistics I've seen to say that it's not equal in all places.
I think that's not just an American problem, to be honest with you.
Right.
If you're a student of history, that's any criminal justice system that's ever been created. That's the truth.
Right.
So just to be honest, to have an honest conversation, that's true. Any empire or kingdom or republic that has ever been created, that's true. Mm-hmm. Okay? Some people are going to get off if they have enough money to do it.
Right.
I believe you. I've seen it enough myself personally to know that's true. I think one problem that we have as Americans is we like to look at statistics and we like to listen to the news and believe what we're told. But I'm capable to use my own eyes and my own judgment to see the truth of the things that happen around me. Mm-hmm. I believe that. I see that as true. Mm-hmm. Now, that was a lot of information in my first question. So if drugs happen to be legalized, let's say, and the FDA controls the drug trade as they do prescription drugs now, there's no longer a black market where it's not just minorities, it's the poverty line. It's not the color of your skin that's causing this epidemic only. It's people that are in poverty are able to make a lot of money really quick because there is a black market. If the FDA was in charge of even recreational drugs, that black market would go away. We saw that during Prohibition in the 1920s. When alcohol was made illegal, people went wild. People were drinking themselves to death.
Right.
There was all the mobsters that are famous now happened because alcohol was made illegal. Some of my libertarian friends would say that's also true of drugs today. It's causing a black market. It's causing violence. If the government controlled it like any other drug, that wouldn't be there.
So basically, you're saying that people desire to rebel against.
It's human nature. And the problem is that we cannot legislate human nature.
Right.
We cannot legislate morality. Yes.
Exactly. I said that very statement just last week. I'm like, you can't legislate morality. And I think and I would get off on top, not just racism, but the issue of big government and the fact we want to control every aspect of our lives. It's just not feasible, and it's making problems worse, it seems.
Right. The idea behind that, to make drugs legal, and again, I'm not condoning that at all. I could never tell my child it's okay to take drugs, so I can't tell any other kid that it's okay to take drugs.
Right.
Okay? But the idea there is that the drug black market is fueling gangs. All of the illegal weapons, all of the violence, all of that is caused because they're fighting over drugs.
Yeah.
If they don't have control of drugs anymore, there's no more. Well, I can't say that because there may be something else that they're fighting over.
Exactly.
But that's the mentality.
You would think that if there's no more illegal drug trade to try to take over, there's no turf war over illegal drugs or whatever, that this issue would go away. You would think, in theory.
Right.
But I guess there's really no way to know. It seems to me, I will say this, and this is kind of a black eye to the African American people that I've seen, that I work with personally. And it seems like I work with a lot of young black males in the past 15 years, and some of them, it seems to me, will do whatever it takes to try to get by without working hard. Not all of them. That's the thing, because I work with a lot of white kids the same way. It's truth. Either you have a work ethic or you don't. And I think one of the negative things in the African American community is that, let me back up. During the slave days, slaves were not allowed to learn to read. If a slave knew how to read, chances are he'd be killed. And so it's funny how a society can say, at that particular time. Don't allow them to know how to read, but and keep them all stupid, and then make fun of them for generations of saying they're stupid. And that has carried over into the black community to say there's a lot of smart black kids who are afraid to be themselves and make the best grades possible because they're made fun of for being, nerds or geeks or whatever. Like I would. I mean, I made great grades in school, and I was, criticized for that, and said, people said a lot of stupid things about the fact that I made good grades. And so we have to teach, there's been a push, I think in the past 20 years, to really push the mentality out that says, who says you have to be, who says you can't be good in school? Who says that you can't learn as much as possible? And the whole idea, if I'm gonna be a black successful young man, I have to be good at sports. I have to be good at entertainment. Those are the ways that that's the ways I become successful and yet keep my blackness, so to speak, which is a term I hate, which I've heard many times as a kid. So thankfully my mom was pushing in my head to, she didn't care about sports. Couldn't care less about. She didn't care if I played a sport at all. She didn't want to play football. She's like, you're gonna bring home A's in my house, and so that's what I did. I brought home straight A's, and she made it clear to me that this is where you get respect when you make great grades and you show people how brilliant you are. So in turn, 20 years later, I'm working with a lot of young black males, and I'm telling them, why can't you be successful in school? Who says you can't make great grades? And they're like, Christian, man, you went to college, you didn't play a sport? Like, no, believe it or not, I didn't. I studied and I actually graduated. So, but a lot of young black men have kept that mentality to say that it's not keeping your blackness to be smart in school and to be educated, but yet the other side of the coin, they see a Barack Obama who was not an athlete, who was not an entertainer, and they're celebrating him. I'm like, well, who's more like him? Am I like him or you like him? If you're trying to, you're trying to be successful, but you're trying to do it in your way. I'm like, but he was educated like I am. I wasn't a lawyer, and I didn't, but I chose to go into the mental health field. But so we're trying to teach young black Americans today to really forget what everybody says about, particularly in your neighborhood. If they're making fun of you for being smart, let them make fun of you. But you can be a Barack Obama and be, every bit successful in politics, or Dr. Ben Carson, or whatever the case may be. You can be successful in any area, no matter what anybody says. And so that's when I talk about the African American community, I talk about the fact that we have to really teach our kids that being smart is okay. Because if for so long, hundreds of years in this country, we were told not to be smart. We're told we couldn't be smart at first, and now you shouldn't be smart. And so that's a shame on us, in my opinion.
I haven't lived in those shoes, so it's hard for me to see that a lot of times. Let's talk about our neighborhoods responsible for that kind of thinking. Is it your family? Is it your schools that are putting out that message? Where do you think that message is coming from now?
I think the neighborhood, the community that you grew up in is a big part of it, and the family that you grew up in. I give you an example. I was doing in-home counseling before I got my master's. I was in in-home counseling. So in that type of work, I went from home to home, obviously in home, sat down with one particular client, and sometimes worked with the entire family. Depending on the situation of that family. About 3 years ago, I had a client, I'd say she was about 19 or 20 years old, a white girl, and she had a small child who had a lot of physical disabilities. She wanted to go back to school. She quit school, but she wanted to go back. And her family, a white family, told her, just get on disability. Make up something. Get on disability. You'll be all right, and the government take care of it. I said, what do you want to do? She said, I want to go back to school. And I said, why can't you go back to school? Who's stopping you? And she didn't know what to say to that. I remember the confused look on her face. And if your family is telling you, this is how you do it, this is how you get by, you'll be okay, the government's got a system that's open to you, don't better yourself. Why would she listen to me? I saw her once a week for about 3 months. Why would she listen to me? If everybody that you live with and your cousins, aunts and uncles, grandparents, or whoever she heard from, they're all telling her, get on disability. So I use that example as it makes no difference what race you are. The fact of the matter is your family has a huge impact on how you view the world. And if they tell you that you don't need to go to school, to this day, her case was closed, and I have no idea whatever happened to her. And if she decided to go back to school, which I hope she did, but I remember that being a crucial thing. The fact that her family kept her down mentally. She had a drive to really better herself. And they were trying to snuff that out for whatever reason and just tell her to get on disability and just sit around all day. Mm-hmm. And that really frustrated me then. And it frustrates me in anytime I hear about a family telling anybody, why try to, or not even to talk them out of it, but to say, you can't do that. You'll never be able to do whatever. That drives me crazy when I talk to a kid and they tell me that their parents say, you'll never be able to be a doctor. Don't even try. So I think individual families are huge setbacks for some of these kids that I've worked with. And of course, I'm trying to speak life to them. I'm trying to encourage them and tell them, whatever you dream of doing it, believe there's a possible way to do it. If you want to, you can do it. I said, but I always tell them it's going to be hard work. And the truth of the matter is, I tell some of the black kids, you got to work a little harder than most to really be successful, because there might not be open doors for you in every area, but you can do it if you make up your mind to do it. But I think that's the biggest issue we go back to racism. I think I have seen or known of some closed doors to some black kids in some areas still to this day. And I tell them, there's nobody that can keep you down forever. You might face prejudice, you might face racism, and somebody may secretly try to keep you down. But in this day and age, if there's anything that the civil rights movement has done, is allowed in 2017, say you can still be successful no matter who tries to keep you down. There is no system that keep you down forever if you really work hard.
Right. I would hope that if nothing else, President Obama's legacy can be that. I did not agree with the man on his policies, but I have a great respect for where he is now and what obstacles he had to overcome to reach that level of success. You had mentioned government's role in our conversation. I want to hold off on that, but I think it's important to at least bring it up. I think that's actually something that we could probably dedicate a whole podcast to maybe at a later time,
right,
is government's role in the African-American communities. Let's talk about right now, there seems to be a resurgence of conflict between minorities and whites, more so than it has been in the last decade or so. A lot of anger about things that have happened. In your own personal opinion, how can we as white people help relieve some of the pain and I don't want to say perceived, because I'm not on the other side of all this. To me, nothing's changed in the last 10 years that would cause things to be worse now than they were. But the emotions are real nonetheless. Right. Okay. Right. Whether anything else has changed, people are very angry right now. They're very hurt. There seems to be a lashing out. How can we as white people reach out to the African American community and say, we want things to be better? We want to have a good relationship. We do not want these problems.
Right. I think a level of sensitivity has to come with some of these issues. For instance, you may remember Trayvon Martin.
Yes.
That whole situation happened. And then there's the situation like Michael Brown, Ferguson, Missouri, that type of thing. And there's several other shootings that happened, either, from someone or a police officer shooting a black man or something like this. And the first thing that happens after a black man gets shot in those situations, people want to, particularly the white community, from what I've seen, they want to say, well, what type of black man was he? Was he a criminal? If he was a criminal, well, he got what he deserved. If he was a good kid, then maybe that police officer should be, punished in some way or whatever. And so the first question seems to ask is, was he a good black? If he was a good black, then, if he was a bad black. And so it's not a fact. It seems to be no sensitivity about the fact that a black man is killed, a young black man in many situations is killed, and nobody seems to care about the fact that he's just dead. They just say, "What type of person was he?" And that, I think, has sparked a lot of anger from a lot of black Americans that I've seen. And in some of these situations, we've seen in the past few years, the cops are questioned. They say that this black person attacked them, or they say I've heard different stories from different, the whole thing, from my understanding, the whole thing about Michael Brown and Ferguson, there's still been discrepancies on what happened in that situation, whether he tried to go for the police officer's gun or whether he had his hands up. I've heard various stories, and depending on who you want to believe, that's what typically you believe. I don't know. I just know that, for starters, I believe that the black community is wanting the white community to just say a kid is killed, and doesn't matter what kind of kid he was. Now, I believe, let me back up and say my personal opinion. A police officer has to protect himself. I believe, I support the police officers to do their job to keep us all safe. And I realize, we have to have order in every society. So the police officers do that. However, I have seen with my own 2 eyes, some police officers abuse their power in a neighborhood. I've seen it happen. And so if that police officer, I'm gonna give an example here in Farragut, Tennessee. Farragut is a very upscale community. A lot of wealthy white people live there. If that police officer went to Farragut, Tennessee here, would he act the same way in that area if he came to Walter P. Projects in Knoxville, which is very impoverished, where the average income is $8,000 a year? Does he act the same way in Farragut that he acted in Walter P? Probably not. He's got a different mentality. He may look at the people there and say, these people are a scourge in our society. They're not providing anything. They're not benefiting us. So therefore, I can treat them however. So I believe that, I've said this previously, I believe that white people have to call out white people. I believe we have to call out our own. If I see a black person, if I know of a black person who is spewing hatred towards another race, I believe I have to speak out to him and say, you're not helping the situation. It's not, I understand that you're angry. I'm angry at some things too. But for you to lash out, for you to spew hate, for you to say, let's kill cops or whatever's going on, that's not helping anything. We as a society want to kill cops. What's going to happen? A lot of young black kids are going to get killed too. And the police officers have the right to shoot back. So I say, white people have to call out white people. If you know of a police officer, if you're a cop and you know of another cop who has said racist things, who has tried to antagonize a black kid to do something stupid so he can beat him down or whatever, I believe it's the good police officer's duty to call out the bad cop and say, you're not going to allow this in our precinct. We're not going to, you're not going to do this or whatever. Because blacks protesting, we can protest all day. That doesn't necessarily going to bring change. We may, I see a lot of people protesting and screaming and going on and stuff. Yeah, we can say how we're angry. We can demand more equality, but that's really, protest is really going to do. It's only going to do so much, if at all. But I believe until other white people with the credentials, with the power to say, we're not going to allow it. I don't care what color you are. I don't care who you are. If I know of racism, I'm going to speak out against it. That's when it's going to bring some real change. And I believe that if you care, I can say this personally that several white friends that I've had personally have asked me, what do you think? What can I do differently? What needs to change? For just the fact that you care. And you say, I want to make race relations better. Maybe not, I can't do it worldwide. I can't do it in this country, but I can do it here in Knoxville. I can do it in, Cleveland, Tennessee. I can do it in Georgia, wherever you are, try to make it better. If you care, that's a start. And you sincerely say, I want to make things better, and I'm going to be a voice for equality. That's where it starts. And so even though I know you said you didn't think about racism 30 years ago, but now it's on the forefront of many people's minds. And so I know that I believe that everybody has to try to think about, do I do something differently because if a person that's black walks up to me, do I act differently than a white person walking up to me? What is that within me? You have to sometimes question yourself. Am I racist even to a small degree? And if so, what do I do to try to fix that within me? That's when we make steps to really make change.
I want to take it from my side just a little bit. Some of the things that I see, a message to the African American community, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but it probably will. We were talking about the perception of African Americans as violent because of the statistics and stuff that we hear. But there's also, from my perspective, there's a glorification of thug life and violence in African American communities. All right. Gangster rap,
right,
and this sort of thing. To me, I don't care what color you are. The stuff is vile.
Right.
Some of it, not all of it,
right?
But some of it is.
Right.
Talking about violence and murder and drug life and glorifying all of these things to where, in my perception, again, a lot of young African American men, especially. No, that's not fair. I think both sexes can be treated equally there. Mm-hmm. They get this mentality of this thug life, this violent life, or, that they think it's cool to be violent,
right,
or whatever. Also, you look at what happened in Ferguson and Baltimore, they weren't protests, they were riots.
Yeah.
African American communities were burned to the ground by African Americans. That doesn't make any sense to me. I can understand if you're mad and you go burn down the police station, which I am not condoning in any way whatsoever. At least that would be a logical move. Burning down your neighbor's shop is not logical to me.
Right.
Doesn't make any sense.
Right.
It's just emotions, and sometimes, from my perspective, an excuse.
There's a quote that I know I'm going to completely botch. I'm paraphrasing it. Something to the effect, the riot is the voice of the unheard. Something to that effect. So, of course, I don't condone it either. When anger has boiled over and people feel like a society, a city, wherever they live has totally neglected them, totally couldn't care less about what they're going through. They feel like the only thing they can do is break something. You know, just like a small child throwing a tantrum. It's a similar situation, and so they're so angry they just decide I'm gonna burn this house down. I'm gonna mess this building up, whatever. And I'm not saying I condone it. Obviously, I don't condone it. From a mental health standpoint, I understand exactly what happens. And you can't talk somebody down when they're so mad and they feel like what happened to that kid could happen to me tomorrow or whatever, and they say I'm gonna show this city how I feel. You may not hear me if I was to speak to you in a civic meeting or community meeting or whatever. You might not listen to what I have to say, but you're gonna see that I have power to do something to show you how angry I am. That's basically what's going on with the riot, and sadly, that's why it happens. And so until leaders of that community say we can't have this here, we're going to try to make this better. I know it's going to take time, but violence doesn't help anything. I tell the people violence only breeds more violence. You break stuff, you fight back, whatever. I understand why you do it, but you're not helping anything. As for rap, rap music, for instance, I remember, as a little kid, I remember, rap music getting bigger and bigger. And so, MC Hammer was one of the biggest rap names. And then, of course, right after that, NWA comes out. And NWA, which was, for those who may not know, Niggers with Attitude, Eazy-E and Ice Cube and Dr. Dre and those guys on the West Coast come in and bring a whole new style, a whole new sound, and a different mentality to music. They were voicing their anger of being young black men in Compton, California, and feeling like they were neglected, feeling like the police had it out against them, that type of stuff. And so a lot of black men at that time, they couldn't identify with MC Hammer. I mean, his music was entertaining,
sure, but
they was just like, he's all glitzy and dancing like he is or whatever, and it was kind of ridiculous to some. But then these guys come along with a whole new sound, with this, with this anger in their music, and a lot of young black men at that time was like, man, these guys are speaking my language. They saying exactly how I feel. I'm not justifying the lyrics to the music they said, although I did listen to it a lot of it when I was that age, when I was in my teens. I listened to it. I'm not justifying the lyrics, but they were speaking like any artist, speaking what they experienced. And so what's funny about that is that in the 25, 30 years since, a lot of these guys that come out with these gangster rap, whether it be a gangster rap group, whether it be just an individual, a lot of them never lived it. They're putting on a show, acting like they're all tough and hard, and that's not who they are at all.
Right.
But they say now, whether it's sales or whatever.
Right.
So I'm like, me personally, strictly from an artist standpoint, I'm like, if you didn't experience something, don't try to put it out there like or what it was. And so when some of those guys in that community get exposed for being frauds because they didn't really make that music, I mean, that's not who they are. They're then they're laughed at, and it's, they don't sell anymore or whatever. But the aspect of gangster rap and what's happened in the past 30 years with it, and obviously it's not a good thing,
right?
I don't like women being called various names in the music. I don't like a lot of obviously young kids see it, they want to aspire to be like this, and it's not, and it's not who they are or whatever, and it only brings more problems. So there's two sides to that. It's like, all right, sure. I respect the fact that you want to say this is what happened in my life, and this is the music I make because of that. But at the same time, we have a responsibility to also try to teach the young generation, like, you put out how you felt, you put out what you experienced, but what are we trying to teach the kids coming up underneath us? What are we trying to teach them how to live? So there's, I think there's a responsibility on both sides of there.
Right, absolutely. Again, a lot of what we see is just perception. It's not reality at all. I think a lot of the anger that the African American community faces, and again, this is just me outside looking in. I don't live this, so I this is just my perception or some things that I observe. Like media, a lot of times, let's just be honest, they don't always tell the truth.
Right. Exactly.
So because someone disagrees with you does not make them a racist. Okay?
Right.
We have differing opinions.
Right.
I don't hate you because you're a different color than me. Okay.
Right.
So that's one thing I think we got to address. Okay.
I agree. Listen, I've always, the term racist is thrown around way too much.
Yeah.
I think a lot of terms in this society today, people use the word love and hate way too much. Just because I agree with you, it doesn't mean I love you. I may agree with this aspect. We talk about this certain topic. I agree with you. That doesn't mean I love you. And just because I disagree doesn't mean I hate you. And just because we're a different race, we have a disagreement doesn't mean that you're a racist. But yeah, this stuff is used so it's just painted with a broad brush, and just to say, all right, this is who you are. Really to say, I don't have to listen to you anymore. We disagree. I can call you a racist. Therefore, I can just cast off anything else you have to say. And that's totally against. I'm like, that's what we're here to talk about it, and we're here to try to get other people to talk about it. And so when people throw out terms to try to say, well, this is who you are, so therefore we don't have to listen anymore, that goes directly against about what's going to help us make things better. And that's how that's by talking to one another.
Right. To me, I'm afraid that the progress that the African American community has made, and they have made progress.
Yeah.
Things have gotten better for the African American community in some ways.
Yeah.
In some ways, it hasn't,
Right.
in my opinion. And when we come back at another time and talk about government involvement, we can talk about my opinions on that a little bit more.
Right.
But, Donald Trump's election, and I'm not supporting a candidate on this podcast. It's not what we're about. We're about ideas. His election to me is not a white lash. Okay. The white people didn't get mad at the black people and elect Donald Trump. That's just not what happened. But I am afraid that if the rhetoric continues, the constant talk of being racist, I'm not a racist. I don't want to be called a racist, and I'm offended to be called one.
Right.
And that's just me personally.
Right.
Support him or not, when Colin Kaepernick decided to take a knee and not stand with his hand over his heart at the national anthem, he has every right to do so.
Right.
And the NFL has every right to get rid of him if they want to. They're a private organization, and some people say that that's hurt their ratings this year. People have stopped watching the NFL
right.
because they're mad about this.
Right, I've heard that.
And he has every right to do that, personally, in my opinion, on his own time, not the NFL's. But I understand his point that, he's standing up for people that he thinks are being oppressed or whatever. And I'm sure that's true. You've experienced it yourself. I'm not denying that. But the whole country is not racist. And to me, for him not to stand for the national anthem says, America, you are racist. And I'm not. I am not a racist person. I've been friends with you for, close to 30 years now.
Right.
Do I wish... I was looking at my Facebook page the other day. I have very few black friends on Facebook. That is not my choice. I don't know why that is. It's not like I chose not to make friends with black people.
Right.
But I'm not around black people very much, to be honest with you.
Right.
The activities that I'm in, the church that I go to, there's not any black people there. I'm a Republican. So when I go to Republican meetings, there's no black people there. I wish there was.
Right.
There's these pictures that have gone around recently of Facebook of whitest picture ever. Or I'm sure you've seen it of boardrooms and political rallies and stuff.
Right.
I don't want them to be the whitest room ever or the whitest picture ever. If you're an African American, I would love for you to come to a Republican meeting. And I can understand what happened in the 60s with maybe why that is. But the Republican Party now, to me, in my opinion, is not white because we don't want black people there. We're white because no black people show up.
And, I understand that completely. And, some blacks feel like, again, I'm not speaking for all of them.
Sure.
Some blacks feel like this organization would never understand me. This organization would never accept me. And whether or not that's true in where you are versus where, Alabama or Arkansas or wherever else, I don't know. Different regions or different states have different attitudes or whatever, different mindsets. But, I know some black people feel like, they're not going to accept me. They can't understand what I've been through, and they don't want to know. So they don't want to know what we've been through. But that's not true about it, because I know some white people who ask me, how do I help this situation, or how do I make things better? So that's, I know that's not true personally, that there's some white people who want to understand. But, me, I mean, I grew up in I grew up in an all white church in my hometown. And so I was around more white people maybe than the average black man growing up, you know. So things were a little different for me to have a different mindset. But at the same time, I experienced more racism because than the average black. Because a lot of people said things not out of hatred, I don't think, but out of ignorance. They just didn't know any better. But anyway, I digress. The bottom line is that your organization, the Republican Party, whatever, I think my dad is a staunch Republican, and I don't know too many black men his age that are Republicans, but he's a serious Republican, and he cracks me up with some of the stuff he says. And so I don't view myself as a Democrat or Republican. I'm more independent. But he and I've had some debates about some situations and things that's happened in the political realm the past couple of years. But another thing, I'm gonna get off topic a second. The divide among the black community. For one black man to say, well, I am a Republican, or I believe, for a black man to say, I voted for Trump, which I didn't vote for Trump, but I know some blacks who did in my family.
Sure.
And some other blacks to say, you can't vote for him, blah, 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 and there's all these arguments among the black community. I use my family as an example, but I say that on a wide range. So the black community is divided now about what's best for the black community in America. Well, the black community can't come to agreement on that either, many of them are arguing about this person or that person or whatever. And what bothers me the most is how the black community, how one says to the other, or you voted for Trump, or you do this type of job, or you work here, or whatever you do, you're a sellout. And they have all these racial slurs that's used within the black community to hurt each other. And I'm like, first of all, we're never going to gain anything more if we can't come to agreement within ourselves about what we want or what's best for us. And so that's where the black community is very divided in a lot of different areas about what's best for us, because of, in my view, not every black person is taking advantage of every opportunity afforded to them. Some minorities still want a handout. Some minorities say, this country owes us more because of what happened so long ago. And some minorities say, this is the way things are, and I'm going to use what I got to get more of what I want or whatever. So there's just a different mindset I have seen among the black community in general that I feel like is why we're not making any more strides for equality in a lot of areas.
Right. I think factionalism is something that's in human nature. You're going to be pulled to people that are like you. It doesn't matter what it is.
Right.
Plumbers are going to stick with plumbers. African Americans are going to stick in communities together, either naturally or the government pushing them in. And again, that's a discussion we can have on another podcast. Right. But I think it's best for people to worry about what is good for you as an individual. Don't worry about, and this is hard. It's simple, but it's hard. You know what I mean? It's very complicated to not worry about what your neighbor is going to think, or your family, or even your mom and dad, as you discussed earlier about that girl that was wanting to go to college. I think we have to decide what's best for me.
Well, let me explain to you why that's a hard part in the black community.
Okay.
There was a time that if a black person had so much talent that person could not be ignored. For instance, Jackie Robinson, or Eartha Kitt, and I'm thinking of different people from the early 1900s.
Sure,
1900s,
yeah.
That they had so much talent that they were, or beauty or whatever, that they were brought out. Sidney Poitier, whoever, they were brought out and they were put on TV or whatever. It was expected that black American then try to help another black American come up to. White Americans don't have that same mentality. They don't have to, but black Americans, that's just ingrained in us from when, if you become a success, you're supposed to help others become a success too, because they might not be able to get the opportunity on their own. So that, so from I can go on back, but particularly 1930s, 40s, 50s, so many of them had opportunities and they were expected to pull some others up there with them, help them get a chance to become successful also, and to show their talents off to the white world. Okay. So it's really hard to now tell the black community, you don't have to worry about everybody. Focus on the individual. What you can't, because you can't do that as a community. You can't pull everybody else up, or you can't. That's really hard to do because that's just what we're expected to do. I think that has changed that in the past in my lifetime, the past 20 years, you don't see that so much. Because I think now, black people are just afforded more opportunities overall. Not everywhere, but still overall, we're afforded more opportunities for all of us to have a chance to show off what we can do in every aspect. Still, things aren't quite where we wanted to be, but I think, of course, you talked about the fact that, there's been strides made or whatever. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I said it too, I have to acknowledge that I have more rights than my dad had when he was my age. And of course, we all have more rights than my granddad had and so forth, going on back. Yes, we have to acknowledge the civil rights movement has helped us gain a lot of strides in America today, truthfully. And I think a lot of the anger that a lot of blacks are portraying out now is not so much about how things are now, but they're trying to speak out for the generations previous. I really believe that. I think they're when we continue to talk about the riots in Alabama, I mean, when you look at Montgomery, Alabama, or Birmingham, what happened in the 60s and that kind of stuff, and you see these type of pictures from slavery keep coming up. It's not, it's people say, well, you should forget that stuff. It happened so long ago. But the fact of the matter is, I think a lot of modern day African Americans today say, they didn't have a voice 100 years ago. They didn't have a voice 50 years ago. I have a voice now, and I'm letting my voice be heard not only for myself, but also for them. And I think a lot of white people don't understand that when they're speaking out, it's not just about 2017, but it's about 1967 and so forth, And that's why I say, yeah, we can acknowledge it, we can remember it. I don't think that stuff shouldn't be forgotten, but we can't let it affect our emotions today about what happened 50, 60 years ago. We can't, and beyond. I can't still get mad about it, even though I say, yeah, slavery happened, Jim Crow era happened. We know it was terrible. We're glad the fact that majority of white Americans tend to say that was wrong, But I can't let it get to me and still make me angry, like it made my dad angry or so forth,
Remembering those times are important. I think it's an important lesson for both communities that it wasn't the government that started the civil rights movement. It was the people. Mm-hmm. And the government came along later.
Right.
The government is not going to fix our problems now.
Right.
It's the people that have to do it. Coming from my side, my perspective, I have a great deal of respect for Martin Luther King. His message, what he did, there was some personal things. He was a man just like all of us, and he was a sinner just like all of us.
Right.
But he was a great man.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have as much respect for, say, Malcolm X.
Right.
Because he represented something totally different than what Martin Luther King did. I would happily march with Martin Luther King today. I would not march with a Malcolm X.
Well, Malcolm X, you may not know, Malcolm X at the end of his life began to change his tune. Mm-hmm. He started to think a little differently about how the movement was going. And, he was killed by his own people. He was killed by the people that he, had worked with for so long, So, and I think that's really what downgrades his story as compared to Martin Luther King's story. And what cracks me up is the fact that when I see on social media, Black Americans talk about violence, shoot cops, beat that white person, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, we wouldn't be here without the belief of a nonviolent movement. We wouldn't be where we are today without that. And so now people are still talking about violence today as if violence is going to get us anything. Has it ever gotten us anything?
Right.
No. So I'm like, why have we forgotten this message that Dr. King said so long? Nonviolence. It works. It takes time. Mm-hmm. It doesn't happen swiftly all the time like we want, but it is effective. Nonviolent, peaceful speaking about this is what we want to see happen, and let's sit down at the table and talk.
Well, I don't think we've solved the problem today, but at least I hope that the listeners can get a better understanding of where the other side is coming from. A lot of times, remember that when you say something, the other side may take that as a totally different meaning.
Right.
And it's important to understand what somebody means when they say it and don't act emotionally. And that's hard. I'm not saying it's easy at all, but I want the African American community to be successful. Mm-hmm. When I look at you, and this may be wrong, I don't see a black guy. I just see a guy I know and somebody I respect. Color doesn't mean anything to me when we're talking. That may be different to the African American community. Mm-hmm. And if so, that's fine. But the message has always been treat us equal. Well, maybe that's not the message. Maybe it's treat us as an equal African American, or recognize that we are different culturally or,
Right.
or whatever.
Right.
But treat us as a human being.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I've heard it said different ways. I think we want, I believe God made color throughout this whole world. Everything, every species has a different color. There's different colors in every aspect. And so I would hope you see my color and still yet say, I respect him and I know who he is. I've known him for so long. And I know, and I do see a white guy, but I see a white guy who I've known to be a friend for so long, So, I mean, color, it does matter. That's the thing. Color does matter, but it only has to matter as much as we let it. I work with little bitty kids I work with sometimes, and they look at me and they, I've had kids where the light bulbs went off. He's darker,
Right.
and they understand, and they have never noticed it before. And the parent gets embarrassed and say, "Oh," and I'm like, "It's okay, that's the real world. My skin is darker than yours, but it doesn't have to mean that I'm any different. My color, and that's one thing I tell the black community. My color does not dictate the way I dress. It doesn't dictate the music I listen to. It doesn't dictate the way I act. It doesn't have to. Not just the black community, society says the color of your skin is supposed to dictate who you are. And then when you're different from that, then you're considered odd. Something's wrong with you. Oh, you're too well spoken to be a black man. That's just odd, But to say, hey, this is the way. I don't have to march to the beat of anybody else's drum. I'm comfortable who I am in my skin. If I want to dress in a suit one day and I want to dress in sweatpants and high tops or whatever the next day, whatever. But I'm still comfortable with who I am. I just hope you recognize that as well and still respect me for it.
It's okay for you to be proud that you're a black man.
Right.
I shouldn't be offended by that because you're just proud of who you are as a person, your culture, where you've come from. That's not dangerous to me in any way whatsoever.
Right.
And I'll just respect that. It's okay that you have a museum dedicated just to African American things. That's not threatening to me in any way whatsoever.
Right.
And it shouldn't be to anybody.
Right. And truth be told, I've been to a Civil War museum and I've seen, the Confederate flags. That was history, and we can't change it. But I still learned something from that, So
Right. I hope that somebody gets something out of this conversation. We want peace and we want everybody to excel in every way. Most of us do. That's not true of everybody. Right. I'm not going to put a blanket statement on that, but we're not all racist, and we want to deal with this in a peaceful way. But at the same time, I do understand the anger and hope that I can somehow mitigate that in some way. Yeah. Christian, thank you so much for being with us.
Jeremy, I appreciate it.
I really want you to come back at some point and talk about government involvement in the African American community and your perception of that. I have one perception. I don't know if yours matches or not, but we'll talk about it.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you.
All right. I certainly hope you enjoyed this episode of Kitchen Table Politics. Please give us a follow on Twitter at KTPOLS. That's KT Polls. And check out our website, KTPolitics.com. We'll see you next time.